Welcome to World True Crime, where we delve into the most intriguing and chilling true crime stories from around the globe. Here we uncover the dark undercurrents of human behavior, exploring the complex motives, relentless investigations, and tragic outcomes that shape the world of crime. Thank you for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's gripping case. The Morgan Reed family lived in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Olympia, Washington. It was the type of place where neighbors exchanged pleasantries and families gathered for weekend barbecues, a peaceful town where nothing much out of the ordinary ever happened. But behind the closed doors of one seemingly perfect home, dark secrets were festering, leading to one of the most shocking crimes the town would ever witness. The incident took place in the summer of 2019, a time when Laura Morgan believed her life was stable and secure. Laura, 28, had grown up in Olympia and had never strayed far from the comfort of her hometown. She married Jason Reed, a man she had met in her early 20s. Jason, 32, was a well-respected real estate agent who had quickly built a name for himself in the community. The couple appeared to be living the American dream. Laura ran a boutique downtown, and Jason's career flourished, providing them with a comfortable lifestyle. They had a beautiful 3-year-old daughter, Emma, who was the light of their lives. To outsiders, they were the picture of a happy, all-American family. Laura's mother, Diane Morgan, was also an important figure in their lives. In her mid-50s, Diane was a retired teacher and a widow, having lost her husband several years prior. Despite the heartache of losing her spouse, Diane remained an active and respected member of the community, known for her warm demeanor and generous nature. She had a particularly close relationship with her daughter, often spending time at Laura's house to help care for Emma. Diane adored her granddaughter and visited almost daily, becoming an indispensable part of Laura and Jason's lives. Jason and Diane also shared a good relationship. Jason had been a supportive son-in-law to Diane after her husband's passing, and their bond appeared natural, given how much time Diane spent at the family home. Diane's presence provided stability and support, allowing Laura to manage both her business and her responsibilities as a mother. For a long time, Laura saw nothing unusual in the arrangement. In fact, she felt fortunate to have such a close-knit family. The affair between Diane Morgan and Jason Reed didn't start with a single moment of passion. Instead, it unfolded gradually over time, an insidious and slow progression that neither fully anticipated. Diane, in her mid-50s, was a widow, having lost her husband nearly 5 years before. She had spent most of her adult life devoted to him and their daughter, Laura. After her husband's death, she felt a gaping void, a sense of loneliness and unfulfilled desires that had gone unnoticed during her years of being a wife and mother. That emptiness only deepened as she stepped into her later years. In her loneliness, she became more reliant on Laura and her family, finding solace in being close to her daughter, granddaughter, and son-in-law, Jason. Jason, a charismatic and successful real estate agent, had always been a supportive son-in-law. From the moment Diane's husband passed away, Jason made an effort to be there for her, often stopping by her home to help with minor tasks and offering emotional support. Initially, this connection seemed harmless, a natural relationship between a caring son-in-law and a grieving mother-in-law. However, over time, that bond evolved into something neither of them had expected. It began innocently enough. Diane spent many weekends at Laura and Jason's home, often staying over to help care for their young daughter, Emma. As Laura became more absorbed in her business, the physical and emotional distance between her and Jason grew. Jason, feeling somewhat neglected by Laura, found comfort in Diane's presence. Diane, still attractive in her 50s with a graceful and mature charm, was more than willing to listen to Jason's frustrations. They began spending more time together, confiding in each other about their lives, desires, and unmet needs. What started as friendly conversations over morning coffee and shared meals soon took a more intimate turn. Diane, who had never considered another relationship after her husband's death, found herself feeling emotions she hadn't experienced in years. In Jason, she saw a man who appreciated her, someone who listened and noticed her in ways she hadn't felt since her youth. Jason, too, found himself drawn to Diane's attention. He admired her wisdom, grace, and the maternal warmth she exuded, qualities that seemed to be missing from his marriage with Laura, who was often preoccupied with work. For Jason, Diane became a symbol of comfort and understanding, filling a void in his life that his wife couldn't seem to fill. Over time, their relationship crossed lines neither had expected to cross. It began with subtle touches, an innocent brush of the hand or a hug that lingered just a little too long. These touches ignited a spark between them, one that grew stronger with each interaction. Both knew what they were doing was wrong, but they couldn't resist the growing attraction. Diane, despite her age, felt a resurgence of youthful energy and desire she hadn't felt in years. The realization that she could still captivate a man, especially someone younger like Jason, filled her with a sense of validation she hadn't experienced since her husband's death. The affair truly began one night when Laura was out of town for a business trip, leaving Jason and Diane alone to care for Emma. After putting Emma to bed, Jason and Diane shared a bottle of wine, talking late into the night. Their conversation shifted from light-hearted banter to deeper, more personal subjects. The vulnerability in that moment created an atmosphere of intimacy, and before either of them fully realized what was happening, they were kissing. That first kiss was hesitant, as if they were testing the waters, but it quickly escalated into something more passionate. From that night on, their relationship took a darker, more secretive turn. Jason and Diane began sneaking around behind Laura's back, stealing moments together whenever they could. When Laura would head to work or go out to run errands, Diane and Jason would find time to be together. They would meet in the privacy of Diane's home or even in Laura and Jason's bed when Laura was away. Each stolen moment fed the growing desire between them, but it also deepened the guilt they both felt. Diane, in particular, struggled with her feelings. She loved her daughter and knew that what she was doing was a betrayal of the deepest kind. Yet the affair had awakened something in her that she hadn't felt in years, a sense of being desired and needed. In her mid-50s, she had believed those feelings were behind her, but Jason made her feel alive again. It was a dangerous dance, and she was well aware of the consequences if they were ever caught. But her need for emotional and physical connection overpowered her guilt. For Jason, the affair with Diane wasn't just about physical attraction. It was about filling the emotional gaps in his marriage. Laura had become distant, preoccupied with her career and motherhood, leaving little room for him. Diane, in contrast, offered him attention, affection, and a sense of being understood. The two became entangled not just physically, but emotionally, making it difficult for either of them to stop. Over time, their shared bed became a symbol of their tangled relationship, one built on lies, guilt, and forbidden desire. The affair continued in secret for months, with neither Diane nor Jason willing to confront the reality of what they were doing to Laura. They convinced themselves they could manage it, that no one would ever find out. But as their affair deepened, so did the risk of discovery, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would come crashing down around them. Laura Reed had always been close to her mother, Diane, and trusted her husband, Jason, implicitly. But over time, small, almost imperceptible changes in their behavior began to gnaw at her. At first, Laura dismissed her unease as paranoia. After all, how could her own mother and husband betray her? But the little things kept adding up, and the nagging doubt that something was off between them wouldn't go away. It all started with a subtle shift in how Jason and Diane interacted when Laura wasn't paying close attention. Normally, Diane was playful and warm with Jason, treating him like the son she never had. But as time passed, Laura began to notice strange, lingering glances between them. They seemed too comfortable with each other, exchanging knowing looks or sharing quiet laughter over inside jokes that Laura wasn't a part of. When Laura entered a room, they would quickly grow silent, and Jason would become defensive or awkward if she asked about their conversations. The first real red flag came when Laura noticed that Jason had become overly protective of his phone. He used to leave it lying around the house without a second thought, but now it was always with him, even when he stepped out of the room for a moment. He had also started leaving the room to take calls or abruptly ending them when Laura entered. This secrecy didn't sit right with her, and Laura's unease deepened. But it wasn't just Jason's behavior. Diane, too, had become more evasive. She began spending more time at their house, often finding reasons to stay overnight even when Laura wasn't particularly busy or in need of help with their daughter Emma. It was during one of these overnight stays that Laura's suspicion took a serious turn. Late one evening, Laura woke up to find Jason's side of the bed empty. Assuming he was in the living room or checking on Emma, she went downstairs, only to find both Jason and Diane sitting too close on the couch, whispering to each other. They quickly straightened up when they noticed her, their expressions guilty. When Laura asked what they were talking about, they gave vague excuses. Something about Diane needing advice on a financial matter. But their nervousness spoke volumes. After that night, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She started paying closer attention, noticing how often Jason and Diane's schedules seemed to align. They would leave the house together to run errands or grab lunch, always under the guise of helping with the household or babysitting duties. These outings became more frequent, and Laura began to feel like a third wheel in her own marriage, as if her mother and husband were bonding in a way that excluded her. The tipping point came when Laura decided to look through Jason's phone while he was in the shower. Her heart raced as she scrolled through his messages, and there it was, the undeniable proof. She found a string of flirtatious texts between Jason and Diane, some even referencing the nights they spent together when Laura was out of town. Her worst fears were confirmed. Her mother and husband had been carrying on an affair right under her nose. In that moment, the betrayal cut deeper than anything Laura had ever experienced. It wasn't just the affair itself. It was the fact that two of the people she trusted most in the world had been lying to her for months. The weight of that betrayal would soon lead her down a dark path, one where revenge seemed like the only way to reclaim her shattered life. When Laura Reed uncovered the shocking truth about her mother Diane's affair with her husband Jason, her world imploded. It wasn't just the affair itself that devastated her. It was who had betrayed her. Her mother Diane, the woman who had raised her with love and care, was supposed to be her closest confidant, her guiding hand through life. Jason, the man she had vowed to spend her life with, the father of their daughter Emma, was meant to be her partner in everything. The two most important people in her life had committed the ultimate betrayal, leaving Laura not just heartbroken, but utterly shattered. The moment Laura found the incriminating texts on Jason's phone, her entire body felt numb. Her mind raced with a mix of disbelief, rage, and profound sorrow. Her heart pounded as she read through the flirtatious exchanges, the subtle references to stolen moments when she wasn't around. It was all there in black and white, confirmation that her mother and husband had been sneaking around behind her back. She felt as though the ground beneath her feet had disappeared, leaving her in free fall, unable to grasp the enormity of what she had just uncovered. In those first few hours, Laura was overcome with nausea and disbelief. How could they? How could her own mother, her blood, betray her in such a callous way? She had never imagined such treachery. Tears of rage streamed down her face as she replayed every interaction she had witnessed between Diane and Jason over the past months. All the little moments that had once seemed insignificant now carried a sinister meaning. Laura remembered the shared looks, the unexplained absences, the way Jason had started keeping his phone with him at all times. It all made sense now. She felt foolish for not seeing it sooner, for trusting them so blindly. Despite the overwhelming emotions boiling inside her, Laura made a deliberate decision. She would not confront them immediately. She knew that if she lashed out in anger, if she accused them outright, it would only lead to arguments, denials, and more lies. Confrontation would give them the chance to control the narrative, to spin their deceit in a way that might somehow make Laura look unreasonable. Instead, Laura decided to do something that required all her strength. She kept silent. Day after day, Laura pretended not to know. She went through the motions of her daily life, interacting with Jason and Diane as if nothing had changed. But inside, she was fuming with rage. Every time Jason kissed her goodnight, she clenched her fists under the sheets. Every time Diane visited to help with Emma, Laura had to bite back the urge to scream. The pain of watching them interact, knowing the truth, was almost unbearable. Yet, Laura was determined not to show any cracks in her facade. She knew that in order to take control of the situation, she needed to remain calm. Her silence became her shield, a way to protect herself from the emotional chaos swirling inside her. But it also became the foundation for something darker: revenge. As weeks passed, Laura's anger grew into a cold, calculating rage. She couldn't simply leave Jason. Divorce wasn't enough. She couldn't merely cut Diane out of her life and move on. The depth of their betrayal demanded something more severe. She wanted them to suffer, to pay for the emotional torment they had put her through. That's when the idea of murder began to creep into her thoughts. At first, it was just a fleeting, horrifying notion, but the more she dwelled on their deception, the more the idea took root in her mind. They had destroyed her life. Now she would destroy theirs. Laura began meticulously plotting their deaths, knowing that she would need to be careful if she wanted to avoid suspicion. She started researching ways to kill someone without drawing attention. Methods that would seem natural or accidental. After weeks of careful planning, she settled on poisoning. It was subtle, and the effects could easily be mistaken for an illness or food poisoning. Specifically, she chose antifreeze, a deadly substance that, when ingested, causes severe kidney failure and eventual death. Ethylene glycol, the chemical in antifreeze, had a sweet taste, which meant it could be mixed into food or drink without being immediately noticed. The effects, kidney failure, confusion, and eventual death, could mimic symptoms of a sudden illness, making it seem like a tragic accident. Laura was careful in her planning. She read about the dosage needed to be lethal, how long it would take for the symptoms to appear, and how to avoid detection. She bought the antifreeze from a hardware store in another town, paying in cash to avoid leaving any traceable transactions. Then, she waited for the right moment to strike. The opportunity came during a family dinner. Laura decided to act as though she was ready to forgive and move on from the tension that had been building in the household. She pretended to want a fresh start, and Diane and Jason, eager to avoid further conflict, were willing to believe her. Laura prepared an elaborate dinner, including wine and a special dessert, making sure to lace both Jason and Diane's drinks with the antifreeze. She carefully measured out the doses, using what she had learned in her research to make sure it wouldn't kill them instantly, but rather slowly, giving her time to appear innocent. As they sat down to eat, Laura watched them closely, hiding her growing sense of satisfaction. Diane and Jason, completely unaware, drank the poisoned wine, complimenting Laura on the meal and her apparent change in attitude. To them, it seemed like a peaceful resolution to the tension in the house, a chance to move past the conflict. But Laura knew better. As they sipped their wine, their fate was sealed. Over the next few hours, the symptoms of the poisoning began to show. Both Diane and Jason complained of nausea and headaches, but Laura feigned concern, offering them water and pretending to care for them as the poison slowly took effect. She watched as they grew weaker, knowing that her plan was working, and soon both of them would be dead. After the poisoned dinner, Laura watched as the symptoms of antifreeze poisoning began to take hold of Diane and Jason. At first, they complained of mild nausea and headaches, which Laura brushed off as fatigue or stress from the long day. However, as the evening wore on, their discomfort intensified. Jason, typically full of energy, began to look pale and clammy, while Diane's normally composed demeanor shifted to one of confusion and increasing distress. Laura, maintaining her role as the concerned wife and daughter, suggested they rest. She even helped Diane upstairs to a guest bedroom, offering comforting words as Diane struggled to stay upright. Meanwhile, Jason collapsed onto the couch, groaning in pain. Both of them believed they were coming down with some sort of flu, never suspecting that the real culprit was the woman they trusted most. The next morning, Jason's condition had worsened considerably. He was disoriented, vomiting, and struggling to stand. Diane, too, was in terrible shape, her breathing labored, her skin pale and cold. Despite their deteriorating states, neither of them suspected they were victims of poisoning. Laura called for an ambulance, knowing it was too late for either of them. By the time they reached the hospital, the damage was already done. The poison had progressed to the point where it was irreparable. Jason was the first to fall into a coma. The doctors were baffled. suspecting severe kidney failure, but they couldn't pinpoint the exact cause immediately. Diane's condition rapidly deteriorated as well, and within hours, she too slipped into unconsciousness. The medical team worked frantically, but the poison had already wreaked havoc on their organs. Laura, sitting in the hospital waiting room, appeared distraught, but beneath her carefully composed exterior, she felt a dark sense of satisfaction. 2 days later, both Diane and Jason were pronounced dead. The initial cause of death was recorded as acute kidney failure, and Laura played the role of the grieving widow and daughter to perfection. She cried at the funeral, comforted by friends and family who had no idea of the truth behind the tragedy. The town mourned the loss of 2 well-known community members, with no one suspecting Laura's involvement. For a brief time, it seemed as though Laura had gotten away with it. She returned to her life, managing her business and raising her daughter, with no immediate suspicion cast upon her. However, as the days passed, the autopsy results came back, revealing the presence of ethylene glycol in both Diane and Jason's systems. The cause of death was ruled a poisoning, and the police launched an investigation into how they could have ingested such a deadly substance. Initially, there were no obvious leads. Diane and Jason had no known enemies, and Laura had kept her behavior so composed and controlled that she didn't immediately draw attention. But as investigators delved deeper into the couple's final days, small inconsistencies in Laura's story began to emerge. There were questions about why she had waited so long to call for help, why Jason's behavior had changed in the weeks leading up to the incident, and why Diane, who was so close to her daughter, had seemed unusually distant in the last few months. A deeper look into the family's dynamics, coupled with interviews with friends and neighbors, began to paint a clearer picture of the strained relationships within the household. Laura's perfect facade started to crack under the pressure of the investigation. The police obtained a search warrant for the house and discovered traces of antifreeze in the kitchen, along with Laura's browsing history, which revealed her extensive research into poisoning methods. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Laura was eventually arrested. During the interrogation, she initially maintained her innocence, but as the weight of her actions bore down on her, she finally confessed to the murders. Her explanation? She had been consumed by rage, betrayal, and a desire for revenge. She told the police how her mother's affair with her husband had pushed her to the breaking point, and in her twisted sense of justice, she felt they both deserved to die for what they had done to her. Laura's trial became a media sensation, with the town and the nation captivated by the shocking details of the case. A mother and wife driven to murder by betrayal and heartbreak. Laura's defense attempted to argue that she had been emotionally unstable, driven to a breaking point by the affair. They framed her as a victim of circumstances, overwhelmed by grief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. However, the premeditated nature of the crime, especially her meticulous research into poisoning and the calculated way she administered the antifreeze, painted a different picture. The prosecution argued that this wasn't a crime of passion, but a cold and deliberate act of revenge. Laura's decision to keep silent for weeks after discovering the affair, all while plotting the murders, demonstrated just how far she was willing to go. The trial was grueling, and Laura's emotional state deteriorated as it wore on. While she initially showed little emotion, maintaining the stoic composure that had been her shield, it became clear that the reality of her actions was sinking in. She broke down in court several times, particularly when discussing her daughter, Emma. Emma was the one truly innocent victim of the entire situation, left without her father, grandmother, and now her mother. Ultimately, Laura was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Given the premeditated nature of the crime, the judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The court viewed her actions as cold, calculated, and devoid of remorse until she had no other choice but to confess under the weight of evidence. There was no sympathy for her in the eyes of the law. Her crime was deemed unforgivable. Once sentenced, Laura was transferred to a maximum security prison. Her once comfortable suburban life was replaced by the harsh realities of incarceration. The years that followed were marked by isolation and regret. As time passed, Laura's notoriety within the prison faded, and she became just another inmate. She had plenty of time to reflect on her choices, and it's said that her guilt over what she had done to Emma weighed heavily on her. Emma, now growing up without either parent, was left in the care of other family members, shielded from much of the media attention that her mother's case had generated. In the years that followed, Laura tried to reach out to Emma from prison, hoping for some kind of reconciliation, but their relationship remained strained. The damage caused by her actions was irreparable. Emma, once a happy little girl with a loving family, was now left to deal with the scars of her broken home and the public scandal that had defined her childhood. Laura's life sentence marked the final chapter of a tragedy that had begun the moment she chose revenge over forgiveness. While she had sought to punish Diane and Jason for their betrayal, in the end, it was Laura herself who paid the heaviest price. Trapped in the confines of her prison cell, she had nothing left but her memories, and the overwhelming weight of knowing that her pursuit of vengeance had destroyed not only the lives of her mother and husband, but also her own and that of her innocent daughter. For Laura, there was no redemption, no chance to undo the choices she had made. She spent the rest of her life behind bars, haunted by the consequences of her actions, forever marked as the woman who had poisoned her family and thrown away everything she once held dear. If you found this case as compelling and chilling as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel, World True Crime, for more in-depth explorations of real-life mysteries and the darker corners of human nature. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light, shedding a spotlight on the complexities of crime and the human condition. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.